basically, I know your snot is not a foreign substance, but it's kind of gross catching your game.
Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to a Father's Day edition of Parker Ridge Sports History. This week I'd like to just go back to our celebration of Topps baseball cards from last week because I had a lot more to say than I ever thought. So I'd like to just kind of segue from the Topps and talk specifically about one shining moment in one of the great Hall of Fame pitchers of all time, and that being Jim Bunning and his Father's Day perfect game against the New York Mets. And you'd be kind of amazed at some of the things that were involved in that game with the 1964 Phillies. Probably, when you think about it, it was the highlight of Bunning's career, or actually the season with the Phillies, because at that point, they were really on an emotional team high, actually playing for a potential pennant for the first time since the Whiz Kids of 1950. But then, as we all know, they just collapsed under the mighty dynasty of the St. Louis Cardinals in the 60s, that being led by Bob Gibson, Tim McCarver, Lou Brock, Bill White, and Curt Flood, and a host of others. So I'd like to really spend some time with that particular game because it's a real shout out to the fathers. And of course, as a kid, I don't remember seeing that game in particular, but I always know whenever you watch the Mets game on Father's Day, I remember Bob Murphy always alluding to that particular Sunday doubleheader, which was won by the Phillies. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. But just going back to celebrating the Topps baseball cards, remember that they're celebrating their 19 or their 70 years publishing baseball cards or printing baseball cards. And if you recall, as I stated in our last episode, Topps originally was not trying to sell baseball cards. They were trying to find a unique way to sell their bubble gum. And of course, we know what really transpired after that. Kids were not collecting or buying the bubble gum as much as purchasing the bubblegum cards. And of course, as a kid, we didn't think about selecting them and keeping them and all things putting them away to pay for our college tuition. We used to flip them, trade them, rip them up, throw darts at them, throw rocks at them for throwing practice, even put them in the spokes on our bicycles to make a pretty cool sound. And sometimes we would just, at the end of the year, just tear them up and throw them in the air. It was just a way of introducing or ending one season and introducing all things football season. So I would like to also refer to the cartoon I did today. You know, there's been a huge explosion of stick'em, or all things to grip the baseball again in baseball. And I know our baseball historians out there know that at one point, spitballs were allowed, and all kinds of foreign substances were being used on baseballs until they got too dirty that the league had to do something about it. And baseball now has gone through kind of that, the immaculate-looking baseball with just the white horsehide or cowhide cover with the red stitches, and just the Delaware, Mississippi, or the Delaware River mud that is applied to it by the umpires each game. But other than that, if you get a mark on these baseballs or they're scratched up or in any way a foreign matter is on it, they're usually thrown out of the game. Well, we know now that there have been pitchers who have been using some sort of sticky substance to get a better, firmer grip on the baseball. So there is right now a controversy in that, and we're going to see how that plays out this year. Anyway, let's get to Tommy Davis. The reason why I bring up Davis and is because as a kid, I could never understand why this guy was traded so much. You know, he had a really a pretty good career, and maybe he may have had a Hall of Fame career had he not broken his ankle early in his career. If you guys recall, and I'm going to show you some of the Tommy Davis cards from Topps. He has a ton of them. He started off with the Dodgers, gets traded to the Mets in 67, plays 1 year with the Mets, and then is traded to the White Sox. I do believe he goes on the Tommy Agee deal. And he goes from the White Sox to the Seattle Pilots. Now, I'm going to show you him in a Seattle Mariner outfit when he was a coach there. And like Jim Bouton, and I had pictures of Bouton from last week. If I can find them again, I'll show you. But like Bouton, he played for that Pilots team, the 1969 team. And if you recall, I showed you the Bouton card. And if I find it here, I'll show it again. But he played for the Pilots, actually, right down there. Seattle Pilots baseball club. Let me tell you, they had some ugly uniforms. It was novel, or that they're trying to use blue and yellow as a color scheme for their uniforms. But the Pilots obviously did not do a good job. They would probably have been better off going to pinstripes. And of course, here's what Topps used to do. Sometimes they would issue cards. If you got traded, they would issue cards, and this is kind of a generic card for Tommy Davis. This is 1970, and you can see that his baseball cap has been doctored, and they put in the fact that he was playing for the Astros because, like Bouton, he went over from the Pilots to the Astros in 1969. And just to allude to the book of Jim Bouton's, Bouton was talking about, here's Tommy Davis, who had been a 10-year pro, had been in a World Series for the Dodgers in 63, had the experience of playing in a number of pennant races. And Bouton talks about how when they had team meetings, that the newly acquired Tommy Davis would remain mum. And Bouton used to ask him about that. And not to put words into the mouths of Davis or Bouton, but it was basically this. Davis said, I can't participate in those things until off the field, until I do something of merit on the field, even with a guy who in 1962 led the National League in RBIs with 153 RBIs and 230 hits, and led in batting average 2 years, 62 and 63 at 346 and 326, respectively. Even he had to always prove himself with a new ball club. And I always found that kind of amazing. And it is really so true. And I think we can equate that to even when you transition from one job to another and you're coming over to a new job and the boss has said, oh, this guy comes with great experience on this particular subject or this particular discipline and all the rest of it. Even then, it seems to be the smart employee is always smarter by taking a back seat and kind of letting himself ingratiate himself to the other workers or do something of merit first before they spout their words of wisdom. And for Tommy Davis, who collected over 2,000 hits in his career, who finished with a 294 batting average, who had over 1,000 RBIs, even he had to kind of take a mute situation, kind of remain quiet and mum on all subjects, even if the team was in the pennant race. But here's his 72 card with the A's. Here's the 69 season. I think this, he goes to the Cubs, and I don't remember this, in 1970. So he basically has a Cub card from 1971. And as I stated, here's his Astro card from 1970 to go with his Seattle card of 1969. And up here, of course, he becomes a coach for the Mariners after his season. He actually, here's a great trivia question. I always thought he ended his career, well, he goes to Baltimore and has some really good years there. In fact, with Baltimore, he had back-to-back seasons where he drove over 80 RBIs solely as a DH for Earl Weaver. And that was 1973 and 74, and he hit 306 and 289. In fact, becoming basically the age of 34 as Weaver's full-time DH, he actually upped his batting average from the year before from 256 to 306, basically 50 points higher and drove in 89 RBIs. So this guy really, I think about it. Now, he does lose a lot of speed. He was never known for being a great fielder whatsoever. Probably slow of foot to begin with. Not the speediest of guys. In fact, I think he only finished with 130 steals. He had a high of 20 in 1969. So he wasn't a barn burner as a base thief. Probably he knew the pitchers, and it was more steals that way. But remember, he breaks his ankle. And I also think he had hurt his knee. So all things running, all things in the field, he does slow down a bit. And instead of becoming maybe a really legitimate three-tool player, he's resolved to being basically a line drive average hitter. But he survives. How do I know that? Guys, he played 18 years. And of course, when I was talking about Louis Aparicio with 2,499 games, ready for this, he finishes up his career at age 37 with the Royals. He only plays 8 games with them, hits 263. But of course, the Royals in their first, that would be their first American League West division win or championship. He doesn't hang long with them. I just wish he hanged a little bit longer, like one more game, because he would have had an even 2,000 games played in his career, and more than likely had gotten one more at bat to bring his total up to 7,740. But he does finish, interestingly enough, with 2,121 hits, 2-1-2-1. So kind of interesting there. And like I said, a 294 batting average lifetime. Really a pretty good career for a guy, like I said, who got hurt early in his career. Does make 2 All-Star teams with the Dodgers. Does finish amazingly in MVP voting 6 times he finished at least in the top 30, or he did earn enough points to merit a slot. His lowest was MVP 20. He finished 26th in the AL MVP in 1974 with the Orioles. He finished as high as 10th in 1973. That was the year that Jackson won it. He was 26, 22, 8. He finished 3rd in 1962. And I got a very good feeling in 62, of course, that was Maury Wills. Just think about that. Maury Wills finished 1st, I believe. I'm just going to check it. Maury Wills finished 1st, Mays finished 2nd, and Tommy Davis finished 3rd. That's really kind of interesting when you think about it, because you would think that Davis and Wills probably would have chipped away enough first place votes, probably would have knocked each other out to give Willie Mays the MVP. And the interesting thing is Mays does lead in WAR in the National League with 10.5. Davis had a 5.9. Wills had a 6.0. Together, they were only 1.4 higher than Willie Mays. Here's what Mays did that year. All he did, just a mediocre Mays year. 49, 141, 304. Davis, of course, 27, 153, 346. And Maury Wills had 6 homers, 48 RBIs, 104 steals, and a 299 batting average. Interestingly enough, Mays walked 78 times that year. And remember, I spent a lot of time about Willie Mays' career and the walks and all the rest of it. And again, if you added Davis's and Wills's walks together, they're only 6 better than Willie Mays. Really incredible season. I really think that had Wills not gotten the record, he probably isn't even in the MVP vote. It probably would have been down to Willie Mays and Davis. And then the writers would have said maybe Davis's 153 RBIs on basically a Los Angeles Dodger team that really had to unearth runs. They had to dig deep looking like for oil just to get a couple of runs in those early 60s. If you recall, they had a switch-hitting infield, but I don't think any of them hit more than 15 home runs. And that includes Wes Parker, Jim Lefevre, Maury Wills, and just to name three of the four. But they didn't even have, and I think Tom Haller, who was their catcher, might have been also a switch hitter. I got to look that up. But anyway, Wills won the MVP in 62, and Davis, of course, was the MVP. He finished in third place. So, here's Tommy Davis. And, of course, even I made that mistake. Tommy Davis, of course, makes 2 All-Star teams. Wikipedia, I still haven't changed that. Last year I did one on the 71 All-Star team, and I said you have to even catch those sources, check a couple of sources, because Wikipedia had Tommy Davis making the All-Star team in 71 and not Willie Davis. And, in fact, Tommy wasn't even on the team in 71. He was working with Oakland in 71. And here's the other thing, too. It's interesting with Davis. He spent some time with the A's and played 79 games with them in 71. I think he does play in the playoffs, but then he is traded to the Cubs and then goes to Baltimore. So basically, and I think he might have been hurt as well in 72. I think his knee had to be drained. That's why he only played 41 games that year and basically only hit about 260. And then, of course, playing full-time with Baltimore, 137 games, he hits 306 with 89 RBIs. That's interesting. And then 158 the following year, he hits 289. Now, the reason that he doesn't stay with Baltimore is that Baltimore acquires Lee May. And then they get another guy very similar to Davis. Not a good fielder, aging, slow of foot, basically can play first base, but I think 90% of the time for Earl Weaver, Lee May played DH and drew a ton of walks, hit 250, always drove in 90 runs, and would hit 25 to 30 home runs a year. Not similar players, but probably what you can say, similar production in similar situations, that they produced what they were expected to do. And that was Weaver needed a guy at DH. Not that he wanted him slow of foot, but he was always making use of what of the talent that he had. Found a spot for both Davis and May. Knew they could drive in runs. Knew that Davis was more of a slasher line drive hitter, would hit for average, maybe not necessarily power. Then inserted May, good for power. He was actually perfect for Earl Weaver because he's that 3-run home run guy that Weaver always talks about in his books. Tommy Davis, last couple of pictures, and then I'll move on to Jim Bunning and all the rest of it. These are from the early 60s with Davis when he was with the Dodgers. And put it this way, you knew with the Dodgers of 62 and 63 that they had to do something with their outfield because they had Davis and Frank Howard. And not altogether similar players, but they are not fleet of foot, nor are they Golden Glove players, even though Frank Howard played basketball. So you would figure he'd have a little bit more speed, but he was definitely the definition of lumbering. At 6'7", 6'8", and about 270 pounds or 250 pounds. That's why I always say Aaron Judge, and this is not a knock against him because you guys know from Park Ridge Sports History past episodes, I love Frank Howard. But I always equate, and it bothers my Yankee fans out there. First, I love Aaron Judge, and I'm not a Yankee fan. I think he's such a good guy for the game. But I always looked at him as this. He is Frank Howard with speed. Better fielder, obviously, but he's Frank Howard with speed. But this is Tommy Davis, even with the Oriole uniform, 1973. Although, I will tell you this. It's funny, but I'm starting to think, you see this one down here? He looks a lot like Eddie Murray there. And and it's not, but very similar. They have the same kind of mustache, Eddie Murray and Tommy Davis. But here he is when he goes to the Angels. I really don't recall him playing for the Angels, but take a look. Here's the other element that we've been talking about in past episodes. Facial hair. Nothing here in the 60s. By the early 70s, even on the Topps cards, everyone was gravitating towards wearing more and more facial hair. Even as a coach, Tommy Davis was wearing, he's wearing a mustache, real big, thick mustache too. What we sometimes call as a walrus mustache. I do have right next to it is the checklist. And when I found out that years ago, checklists, we would just toss those out as a kid, not knowing that, one, you need them for a complete set to have the set be more valuable. That's number one. But number two is that sometimes the checklist is more valuable or very valuable or comparable in value to some of your elite players in your particular set. So it always bothers me now. And of course, you cannot check the checklist. So it's got to be perfect. Cannot have any marks on it for really that set to gain in value. Last thing I wanted to show you, and this is going to be our real segue into the Mets. Take a look. The 1966 Met pitching leaders. This is something that Topps would do. I always call them filler cards, but it was an opportunity to get players that you might not be able to get their own card, or it was an additional way for Topps. Like if you got Tom Seaver, now you had to go out and collect maybe another card of Seaver, either as a Cy Young or as a pitching leader in 1970, 1969, etc. But I couldn't believe, I actually looked this card up, this 1967 Rookie Stars, Tom Seaver and Nolan Ryan. I thought the value of that was going to be through the roof, and it really isn't. I mean, on that page, you have over 600 wins, 8,000 plus strikeouts. How many no-hitters? At least 5 or 6 no-hitters. I think Ryan had 5 in his career, and of course Seaver had his loan with the Cincinnati Reds, which actually transpired, I think, on June 20th, 1978, if I'm recalling. All right, beat the Cardinals as we were talking, and I could be wrong. Maybe I was looking in the wrong place, either on eBay or the worth of the card. But I could have sworn that this card, the value of this card is much higher. And I'm not talking about the fact that it's signature. I'm just saying the card in general. But take a look at the Mets 1960-16. There's Jack Fisher, who gave up a big home run to Ted Williams. I believe he gave up his last home run in Ted's last at-bat at Fenway, and then he retired. Bob Shaw and Dennis Ryband. I only know Shaw from this. I'm pretty sure it might be this Shaw. There could be another Shaw, but he is mentioned as well in Ball 4. And I'll let my readers delve into that, but I'm pretty sure that's the guy that he's mentioned. What I do like about these Topps baseball cards, these pictures in particular, is that that's Shea Stadium in the background. It's kind of cool. And that 371, boy, oh boy, that's kind of iconic for all Met fans because you could always see that 371 when you were watching the game on TV. And they showed the batter going out to left center or into center field, because that 371 always seemed to just jump out of you. And here it is again, 371. It's too bad that the footage is lower than his ERA, 3.92. But, you got to remember this. Shaw really didn't put up bad numbers there. 2 of the 3 are over 500. Jack Fisher showed some promise. The ERA's not bad, but you have to put it in context. I know that the ERA was much lower, so those are a little inflated for the time. And so none of them really panned out. Put it this way. Would you want these 3 in your staff or the bottom 2? I don't think there's much argument. Much argument. All right, let's get to 1964 because there is a number of things that I found very interesting about that team, the Phillies. I always feel bad for them. The Phillies hadn't won. They were kind of mired in last place status for many years in the National League. Remember, they had a good season. They win the pennant in 1950 and then are swept by the Yankees. That was the Whiz Kids, and they never get back, even though they have a couple of good teams, too. In fact, I think the 51 team was competitive, and I think they finished third to the Giants and Dodgers, only a few games out. In fact, I think they were eliminated in the last weekend of the season in 1951. Anyway, that 64 Philadelphia team was 92-70. And here's the deal. At the point they played the Mets on that, and I'm going to use this. I'm going to make Father's Day the third week in June of every year because I believe that's how we always had it. But here's the interesting thing. Bunning wins that game. He beat Tracy Stallard. And I did have Tracy Stallard's picture from last week as one of the guys because I don't know whether I had mentioned it, but I will now. Stallard, of course, is famous for giving up Maris's home run, number 61. I never realized this. That was the only run scored in that game. That was a 1-0 game. So that was a huge run that Maris hit in that game. Not that the Yankees needed the win because they had already clinched. But Stallard gave up the big run there, home run to Roger Maris. It's amazing how they wind up some of them with the Mets and all the rest of it. Here they are. Let's get right to them. But anyway, here's some pictures of the guys we're going to be talking about today. Now, those Phillies teams, didn't realize this until I started doing some study. Here's Jim Bunning. And interestingly enough, Bunning had, I think, 3 or 4 children from what I've read. I think he had 19 grandchildren. Of course, he becomes a representative from Kentucky, makes the All-Star team in 64, it wins 20 games in both leagues, wins over 200 games in his career, is a Hall of Famer. This is his 64 card. I like this one better. I think it's 1965 or something like that. But the Phillies come out of nowhere in 1964. And in fact, they come in on Friday night, June 19th, and they actually play a 5-game series with the Mets in 1964. All at Shea. Ready for this? The Phillies won 4 of the 5. The interesting thing is that weekend, the Phillies won both ends of the doubleheader on Friday night, both ends of the Sunday Father's Day doubleheader, and they lost the in-between game 7-2 as Ray Culp was the victor. And Galen Cisco was the loser. Interestingly enough. I just want to make sure. Yeah. So they come in, and at that point, they come in, and the Phillies had played a doubleheader the week before, and now they're playing another doubleheader. They had played, ready for this, starting with Sunday, June 14th. They played 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. They played 10 games in 7 days. They had an off day on Monday, June 15th. And they would play 3 more games. They would play another doubleheader on Tuesday, June 23rd. Incredible when you think about the number of doubleheaders. So in the space of from Sunday, June the 14th to Tuesday, June the 23rd, the Phillies would go 3-1, 3-2, 6-2, 6-3, 9-3, play 12 games in 8 days. Pretty incredible. And Jim Bunning only won, interestingly enough, one of those games. He only won one of those games in that 12-game set of games. But anyway, Bunning comes in on Sunday, June 21st, and he brings the Phillies to 37-23. They're 14 games over 500. The Phillies would rise to be 30 games over 500 and then collapse. And they were at 30 games over 500. I just want to show my little stats here that I have for this. Phillies were 30 games over 500 as late as like the second or third week in September. Anyway, and then they collapse. And of course, all you Cardinal fans know that they lost 8 of their last 10 and couldn't find anything, which allowed the Cardinals to just, they basically pulled up anchor and just shoved off and sped right past. They sailed right past the Philadelphia Phillies. But that 64 game, ready for this? Here it's played. The Phillies had gone up to 90-60 with a win by Bunning on September the 20th. They're 30 games over 500 on September the 20th. Jim Bunning wins 3-2, and his record right there was Bunning was 18-5 at that point. And then everything fell apart for them, winning only 2 of their last 12 games or so. But just getting back to the Met game, because I want to focus on that a little bit, on the June 21st game, the doubleheader first game, 6-0. Here's the interesting thing. I was doing some studies. Ready for this? Here's who the Phillies had. They had guys like Johnny Briggs playing center field, John Hernstein playing first base, Johnny Callison. We'll come back to him in a couple of moments. Callison, of course, I do have a picture of Callison. Callison happened to be one of my favorite players. And the interesting thing about Callison, I always thought he wore glasses. And obviously, when I found out he really doesn't, or at least he never took a picture that I saw where he was wearing glasses. There he is down there. And, of course, Callison, of course, is going to be famous within a month at Shea because he hits the big home run off Dick Radatz in the 64 All-Star game to win it for the National League, basically in the bottom of the ninth, a game that was the inning was started by Willie Mays' great base running. But Dick Allen was playing third base. Allen went 1 for 3 in that game with an RBI and a walk. Wes Covington in left field. Bobby Wine, who would go on and manage. And, in fact, his son, Robbie Wine, would play. Tony Taylor was at second. Cookie Rojas played short and left field. Rojas, I remember him being a Kansas City Royal and having some good seasons enough to make the All-Star team with the Royals later in his career. Gus Triandos, who had a couple of good seasons there, was the catcher, and, of course, Jim Bunning. Ready for this, though? Here's the Met lineup. Jim Hickman, who would go on to have a All-Star season in 1970 with the Cubs, just phenomenal, had 42 home runs for them. Ron Hunt would be the second baseman. Now, all the people who know this, actually, the Mets started a lineup with 3 All-Stars or future All-Stars at the top of their lineup. Ready for this? Jim Hickman, I know he made the 70 All-Star team. I don't know whether he made any other in his career. Ron Hunt was the first Met to start an All-Star game, 1964. Eddie Kranepool, who made the 65 All-Star game and doesn't appear. And the thing that makes me mad about that, it's his only career appearance at the All-Star game, and they couldn't find a spot to put him in. It's just a shame. And Eddie is just a classy guy, definitely a Mr. Met. If they made a Mount Rushmore for, let's say, Tier 2 Met players, he would definitely be on that. Joe Christopher was a right fielder. Unfamiliar with him. Jesse Gonder. I remember him from Ralph Kiner talking quite a bit about him. Hawk Taylor was their left fielder. Charlie Smith was their shortstop. And, of course, Smith is famous because he was traded for Maris. The Yankees acquire him in a trade for Roger Maris. Maris, of course, goes to the Cardinals and plays on 2 additional pennant-winning teams, 1 World Series championship with the Cardinals in 67. Armando Samuel, George Altman, Tracy Stallard was their pitcher. Ready for this? Then they went to Bill Wakefield, Rod Kneal, who I do remember. I think he might have been on the 69 Mets team. Tom Sturtevant and John Stevenson, who I recall playing for the California Angels because he was a catcher and he was not a very good offensive player. 27 up, 27 down. Now, why do I also pick this up? Ready for this? Interestingly enough, in this game, there are actually 3 players who participated in this perfect game. who led the league in triples in 61, 62, 64, and again in 65. There was 3. Ready for this? George Altman led the league in triples while with the Cubs. There he is down there. George Altman. He had a couple of good seasons. In fact, Altman, I believe, had 27 home runs one year for the Cubbies. Yep, 1961. Ready for this? He does make the All-Star team in 61. Here are his numbers. But he is age 28. So he's on – people who do the metrics, Moneyball, the Billy Beans would say, okay, he had his career year. Now let's get rid of him. Basically, the Cubs do after his 1962 season. But take a look at this season. At age 28, playing only 138 games, he had 67 extra base hits, 28 doubles, 12 triples to lead the National League, and 27 home runs with 96 RBIs and a .303 batting average. And he also scored 77 runs. He had a similar season, not as good, but you'll still take it. Actually, arguably, it's probably just as good. He was 27, 5, and 22 in his extra base hits, 74 RBIs, does increase his stolen bases to 19, and he hits .318. And then, of course, he's on the precipice. He goes downhill. By the time he's with the Mets in 1964, he plays 124 games, 9 homers, 47 RBIs, .230 batting average, and he's 31 years of age. So there's George Altman. Johnny Callison is also a leader in triples. And Callison, and just in case I forget, the other guy was Richie Allen, who led the league in triples. Callison actually did it twice. You know, Callison was not a bad player. His 64 season remains his best ever. But just take a look at his offensive numbers. He would give a real metric guy a lot of fun. At age 23 in 1962, he has 59 extra base hits. He has 26 doubles, 10 triples to lead the league, and 23 home runs with 83 RBIs and a even .300 batting average. Interestingly enough, he has 5 consecutive seasons, Johnny Callison, where he hits double digits in triples. That's pretty phenomenal when you think about it. Not too many guys do that. And especially with Moneyball today, the metrics, nobody really goes for the triple. It doesn't make sense. You don't want to get thrown out and be the first out trying to stretch a double into a triple, nor the last out. And I always thought about this, well then, why be the second out in the inning? Being thrown out at third base. It still remains one of the more exciting plays in the game. So nobody ever explained that strategy. Well, why is it okay then to go from second and try to go to third if there's only one out and now you're the second out? So that's just, the baseball adages and all the rest of it. These are the kind of things that you think about when you're doing these shows. But he had 11 triples, 10 triples to lead the league, 11 triples, 10 triples to lead the league. And then in 1965, he had 16 triples. Ready for this? His power numbers in 63, 36, 11, and 26. His power numbers in 64, 30, 10, and 31. He had 104 RBIs and a .274 batting average. And then in 65, it's 25, 16, and 32. 101 RBIs, .262 batting average. And then in 66, basically, his really last, I would say, outstanding season. He had 40 doubles, 7 triples, 11 homers, 55 RBIs, and a .276 batting average. He does have more RBIs. He does, interestingly enough, go to the Cubs, but he really had his glory moments with the Phillies. And then, of course, I have to show you this guy, Richie Allen. Look at that card. Now, that's not 1964. I was going to show you his rookie card, but this just goes to show you, man, this guy was just he's the quintessential athlete, sculpted, sinewy. You can just tell that he's 190 pounds of muscle There's no fat on this guy at all. And as everyone knows who's listened to this show and watched, I definitely really admired his skills. I really loved Richie Allen, who does, of course, become Dick Allen. Chris Short, I threw him in there because he was one of the mainstays for Gene Mauch. And, of course, Mauch kind of, they always talk about he kind of panicked at the end and kept throwing Bunning and short, Bunning and short, Bunning and short. And by late in the 64 stages, of course, they were just exhausted, which is one of the reasons why the Cardinals were able to catch up to them. I just want to do one other thing just to highlight that 64 and some of the players who were involved in the perfect game, because really it wasn't an exciting game in terms of when they were going to score. The Phillies basically scored from the out of the gate, and it was just basically Bunning in that. But as I stated, Callison hits that home run in 1964. In that game, Billy Williams, Ken Boyer, Johnny Callison all homered. And I believe Billy Williams is the first guy to hit a home run at Shea Stadium in the All-Star game. And Jim Bunning, just want to give you his stats that year, 1964. He's with Detroit, gets traded to Philly, has a number of All-Star years. 6, he's a 7-time All-Star, but 1964 wins 19 games, wins 20 with the Detroit Tigers. In 1957, he leads the league, and he does win. I tell you, he had some really good seasons there. One of the reasons I think Detroit got rid of him was that in 63, even though he made the All-Star team, he was 12-13. The Phillies get him in 64 and 65. And he has 3 consecutive 19-game winning seasons. 57 wins in 3 seasons for those Philadelphia Phillies. Last thing about that game, and then I'll let you go, is that, ready for this? You know how many strikeouts Bunning had in that game? Only 10. And when I say only 10, pretty marvelous. Only 17 balls are hit in the play by the Mets, as they are perfect game on Father's Day, 1964, by Hall of Famer Jim Bunning. This is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports History. Have a great Father's Day, and thank you for watching. Be here next week with another episode.